members of the Monetary Policy Committee and Financial Stability Committee, colleagues and distinguished guests joining us here in person but also online. Good morning to you all. A warm welcome to this November Monetary Policy Committee and Financial Stability Committee press briefing. And to our partners in the media, we thank you for responding to our invitation and always transmitting our message on a quarterly basis. So this quarterly press briefing reflects our ongoing commitment this week to review economic developments of the third quarter of 2025, as well as ensure that our financial and monetary policy frameworks remain sound and supportive of Rwanda's macroeconomic stability and growth ambitions. And as always, for the central bank, our primary mandate remains price stability, ensuring price stability, but also safeguarding a stable and inclusive financial system. And in this session, we will outline the rationale behind our recent decisions as MPC and FSC, how they align with our commitment to prudent macroeconomic management, which is really the foundation for investments and trade, but most importantly for trust in our financial system. And so first, the Monetary Policy Committee assessed the developments of the global economy, which continues to perform better than expected, supported by easing trade tensions, stable supply chains, despite ongoing trade policy uncertainties and geopolitical tensions. Looking at projections of global economic growth in 2025, they were revised slightly upward by the IMF to 3.2%, projected global GDP growth in 2025, and to 3.1% growth in 2026. For sub-Saharan Africa, economic growth is projected to stabilize at 4.1% this year, and rise to 4.4% in 2026. Looking at global inflation trends, which the committee evaluates because they have an impact on our own inflation as Rwanda, we observed that inflation continued to ease. Globally, inflation is projected to reach 4.2%, which is a decline from 5.8% that we had in 2024. However, for sub-Saharan Africa, inflation remains high. Although declining, it will stand at 13.1%. That's the projection for inflation in sub-Saharan Africa in 2025. Global inflation drivers and decline reflect better supply conditions, but also the base effects from previous price hikes. And here I need to mention that contrary to the first half of the year, where because of trade policy shifts and US tariffs, we were expecting to have higher inflation. However, the private sector globally adapted, front-loading their stocks, but also ensuring diversification of their supply chains. That's why we are seeing that inflation at global level will continue to decrease for 2025. And even further, for projection for 2026, forecasts are at 3.7% for global inflation. The elevated inflation in our region is mainly driven by certain countries in Southern Africa, but also the Horn of Africa, where currency pressures and volatile food prices persist. In fact, some of the economies in sub-Saharan Africa are experiencing extremely high inflation, above or around 50%, which significantly raises inflation projection for sub-Saharan Africa. Moving on to commodity prices, which remain an important driver of external balances, but also inflation trends globally and in our country. We can see that energy prices will decline by 12.4% this year and continue to decline further in 2026 by 10.2%. And this is driven mainly by the decline in crude oil prices globally following OPEC's plans to boost production but also increase supply. Although crude oil prices are expected to decline by close to 16% in 2025, for Rwanda fuel pump prices we've seen remain high due to transport costs mainly. And regarding food prices, they are expected to decline by 6.1% in 2025, and this should be translated to less imported inflation for Rwanda. Lastly, prices of other commodities such as metals and minerals remain elevated, increasing by 1.8% on average, but this supports Rwanda's exports earnings, as we will see in a minute. Indeed, merchandise exports for Rwanda rose by 15% in the third quarter of 2025. And this was driven by strong performance in traditional exports, being coffee, tea, and minerals on the back of favorable global prices, as well as stable domestic production. Non-traditional exports as well rose by 50.5%, driven mainly by exports of cooking oil and wheat flour in the region, reflecting the good performance of our manufacturing sector. Imports also continue to increase, but at a lesser pace than exports, increasing by 7.4% in the third quarter of 2025. And this led to a slight increase in our trade deficit by 2.8% in that period. But this is a lesser increase in trade deficit compared to previous years. In addition, strong performance in services, especially tourism, air transport, along stable remittances, continue to help and support our external sector, and our international foreign exchange reserves have remained adequate, as at end September 2025, we had a coverage of about 4.2 months of imports, which is well above our threshold of 4 months of imports coverage. This good performance of the external sector has led to a stabilization of our currency, the Rwandan franc depreciating by 4% in September 2025 compared to a 6.5% depreciation we had in the same period in 2024. And we've looked back in the last 5 years to analyze our exchange rate movements, and we really see this stabilization translated over the 5 years, as we see the highest depreciation that we had at the end of September was in 2023, where the depreciation had reached 13.7% over 9 months. So the fact now that the depreciation is stabilizing at 4% is something that the committee noted as a positive development. One might ask, in addition to exports and a lesser widening trade deficit, there was also a broader weakening of the US dollars on the global foreign exchange markets, as well as domestic foreign exchange market reforms that we have conducted to curb speculation tendencies. The committee then looked at the performance of our domestic economy, and the good news is that Rwanda's economy continues to perform well. In the second quarter of this year, we had a GDP growth of 7.8%, supported by the services sectors, which grew by 8.5%, with strong contribution from trade, finance, and ICT sectors. Industry sector had expanded by 7%, driven mainly by mining, manufacturing, and ongoing construction projects, while agriculture in the second quarter also grew by 7.6%, boosted by a significant increase in export crops, particularly coffee, and growth in other food crops was more moderate but still positive, hence the 7.8% growth in GDP. We use other indexes to look at trend for the third quarter. The GDP growth numbers for the third quarter are not yet published by the the National Institute of Statistics, but internally we use the Composite Index of Economic Activities, which looks at turnovers from the manufacturing and services sectors. And the trend is similar for quarter three, and so we expect GDP growth to remain robust in quarter three. Our corporate index, Composite Index of Economic Activity increased in the third quarter by 13.2%. At both manufacturing sectors and services sectors, as I mentioned. And so we expect economic performance in the third quarter to be in the same trend. Moreover, we use the Business Confidence Index, which is an indication of future developments in business based on surveys, which also improved to 62 and on the index, up from 61 in the same quarter in 2024. So our expectation for a sustained demand in services that will drive growth remains through those two indicators. The committee then looked at the monetary conditions, and what we observe is that for the third quarter of 2025, the interbank rates declined on average by to 5.85% compared to 7.25%. And this follows earlier easing of our monetary policy stance, which we started in May 2024. You may recall that at that time, the central bank rate was at 7.5%. The deposit rates are also declining at 8.7%, while the lending rates are also declining at 15.78% in the third quarter of 2025 compared to 16% in the same period in 2024. And the lending rates and deposit rates generally have a lag in terms of following our monetary policy stance, and hence the decline we still see for the third quarter. But one would ask, what was the impact of our slight increase in central bank rate in August by 25 basis points? And what we've already noted is that there's a direct impact on money market rates, which are now currently closer to the CBR of 6.75%, but it's in the next MPC round where we will have full quarterly data that will show what the impact is on interbank rate, whereas we know that for deposit rates and lending rates there's a lag effect, so we don't expect any increase in the next 3 months. From the monetary conditions, the committee also analyzed inflation developments, having analyzed, one, the global economic trends, the domestic economic performance, foreign exchange markets, and the monetary sector developments we've just seen. So the committee's last set of assessment was around inflation trends, and in the third quarter of 2025, we observed a slight increase in inflation at 7.2% compared to 6.7% that we had in the previous quarters. But inflation still remains within our target band. And in October, headline inflation was at 7.1%. This slight uptick in inflation for quarter three was largely due to increases in core and energy inflation, as you can see in the graph, which outweighed the drop in fresh food inflation. The fall in food inflation and food prices was expected because we are already in the harvesting season of season A. And we've observed also improved domestic supply. Coming now to our forecast for inflation. We forecast headline inflation to average 6.9% for the whole year of 2025. And this is slightly lower than our previous estimates in August, which were 2 basis points higher. In 2026, our forecast indicate an inflation falling to 5.8%, which is really closer to our 5% mid target for 2026. factors that might impact these projections include potential weather-related shocks, especially rainfall patterns that might impact food production and harvest. We also have analyzed geopolitical tensions and volatility in global commodity prices, as well as shifts in global trade policies, which may impact our forecasts. But given these projections, where inflation has remained and is expected to remain within our target range, the Monetary Policy Committee has decided to maintain the central bank rate at 6.75% for the next 3 months, and we believe that this level is appropriate to keep inflation within our target range of 2 to 8%, while continuing to support economic activity and access to finance. After the Monetary Policy Committee decision and outcome, I will now turn to the Financial Stability Committee's meetings, analysis and decision. The meeting was also held this week. The Financial Stability Committee assessed the overall stability of Rwanda's financial sector and concluded that it remains sound, resilient, and well-positioned to support the economy. And now we can go through the rationale behind this optimistic assertion. First, we observed that sustained economic growth underpins financial sector expansion. For the first time, Rwanda's financial sector total assets have reached 15 trillion Rwandan franc. And this is an increase of 24% when we compare total assets at end of September 2024 to end September 2025. Total assets now at 15.3 trillion. And this growth is reflected across all subsectors. The banking sector total assets increased by 23.3%. The pension sector assets were up by 32.9%. Microfinance institution total assets increased by 22.1%, and this is an increase year on year. While the non-deposit taking financial institution, which is a new subsector, total assets increased by 48%. Insurance sector increased by 15.8%, while total assets in Forex Bureau were also on the rise, increasing by 19.2%. This overall expansion in assets increased the ratio of financial sector assets to GDP to 69%, which showcases the role the financial sector plays in financing our economy, as well as offering insurance coverage and contribution to the pension funds. The committee observed that new authorized loans by banks increased by 15.3%, reaching 1.9 trillion. These are new authorized loans in the third quarter. Outstanding loans, which are the cumulated loans across the financial sector, being banks, microfinance, but also the non-deposit taking credit institutions, they also increased by 22.3% and now stand at 6.1 trillion. The committee assessed the financing of economic activities in line with key sectors that contribute to growth of the GDP. What we observe is that for the third quarter of 2025, construction and manufacturing remain the top two finance sectors, accounting both of them for 35% of outstanding credit. This is followed by individual loans. These are loans to households or individuals, as well as the trade sector. We observed as a committee that loans to agriculture increased in the third quarter of 2025 with a share of agriculture at 3.4%. In the past, we were always around 2%. However, this is not a number that we can be happy or proud of, because we know the importance of agriculture in our GDP. And this strategic sector is still underfinanced, and hence we continue engagements with all relevant stakeholders to address barriers that hinder financing of agriculture in our industry so that we can continue seeing more funding going to the agricultural sector. The committee noted that the quality of loan portfolios continued to improve with low levels of defaults. In the banking sector, non-performing loans for the third quarter of 2025 stood at 2.6%, which is well below the 5% threshold, but also lower than the NPL ratio we had in September 2024. For microfinance institutions, we see the same trend, declining non-performing loans ratio at 2.9%, and this is on the back of continued improvement in risk management capacity, prudent risk management being in banks or MFIs, but also a broader base of new loans, which of course then reduces the NPL ratio. We noted as a committee that challenges remained in some Umulenge SACCOs, which have NPLs above 5% prudential threshold. But on a more positive note, newly formed district SACCOs, which are consolidation in every district of Umulenge SACCO, show encouraging signs of improving asset quality. Moving on to stability indicators, the Financial Stability Committee assessed adequacy of capital and adequacy of liquidity, and financial institutions in the third quarter of 2025 still held adequate capital buffers, with capital adequacy ratio in banks well above the 15% at 21.4% capital adequacy ratio. Microfinance institutions are also having larger capital buffers above the 15% required, now having reached 35%, while the solvency ratio in the insurance sector is also at 254%, above the minimum required of 100%. On liquidity, the financial sector also continued to maintain sufficient liquidity buffers to fulfill their short-term obligation and clients' needs, with banks posting liquidity ratio at 302%, microfinance institution with a liquidity ratio at 65%, and the minimum prudential requirement is at 30% for the microfinance sector. And the liquidity in insurance sector is also above the minimum requirement at 115%. So ample liquidity in the financial institution reflect, one, quality assets with low default rates for banks and MFIs, as well as safe investments for insurance generating liquidity. The committee noted that profitability remains sustained across the sector, which supports their growth, as we've seen, a growth above 20% in total assets. We have also noted return on assets that have improved, driven mainly by increase in income from key earning assets across all subsectors. Return on equity declined slightly for banks and insurance, but they remain above 10%, so in double digits. And the insurance sector remains also profitable, with return on equity slightly below last year's level, mainly due to a rise in management expenses, but also a minor drop in underwriting profits. But overall, the financial sector remains profitable with sustained profits to support their growth. One key risk that we assessed as a committee is the risk for the insurance sector of increasing premium receivables. These are receivables of premiums that are overdue above 60 days. We can see that receivables, if we look at maturity of those receivables, the ones above 60 days constitute close to 65% of all receivables in the insurance sector, and this exposes the sector to credit and liquidity risk. And as a central bank and financial regulator, we have already taken regulatory actions this year to ensure a decline in these overdue premiums, and we should start seeing improvement improvements in the quarters ahead, but this is a risk that we continue to monitor in the insurance sector. For the pension sector, assets of public pensions continue to expand, improving coverage and long-term savings. The Public Pension Fund had its assets increasing by 33.8% in the third quarter of 2025. Also, private pension funds are increasing their total assets at 18.7%, with now their assets reaching 115.6 billion. The long-term saving scheme, Ejoheza, also had a very high growth, increasing its assets by 29.2%, and this was driven by increased mobilization efforts targeting informal sector workers. The last subsector we looked at is the payment systems, where electronic payment value continued to increase, representing now 333% in total value of our GDP. This is cumulative from January to September. And retail payments continue to increase, reaching 56 trillion from January to September 2025, up from 35.6 trillion we had in the same period in 2024. In addition, stable and reliable payment system enhance not only efficiency but also trust in digital financial services. What we look at as a committee for the stability of payment system is one, service availability throughout the quarter, as well as uptime for being mobile money services, but also the Rwanda Integrated Payment and Processing System, which is the central payment system that is operated by the central bank. And we can observe that system availability across all systems is on average in the period under review at 99.8%, with most systems operating at 100%, although there were minor incidents that caused downtime, as you can see, system availability dropping to close to 80% in 2 instances in the period under review. So what are the key messages or key outcomes of our Financial Stability Committee? One, that the sustained economic performance supported continued growth and resilience of our financial sector. Second, financial institutions hold good quality assets, ample liquidity, and ample capital to support their businesses. Third, digital payments remain reliable. They are expanding, driven by innovations and efficiency, but we continue to monitor key risks, including loan concentration, premium receivables that we've talked about, as well as cyber security and operational risks across the financial sector. Looking ahead, the committee noted that the financial sector is expected to remain stable, sound, and resilient, well capitalized, supported by strong fundamentals and prudent risk management and oversight. The system continues to support economic activity while withstanding external and domestic shocks. And as always, as central bank, we will continue to monitor risks, both global and domestic, and take coordinated measures to preserve financial sector soundness and stability. So I thank you all for your kind attention, and we will now take your questions.
Thank you, Governor. A few house rules. I will have a round of three questions, but each media house is allowed only 2 questions in the interest of time. Thank you. So let's start with the RBA, and then we'll do CNBC.
Murakoze nyakubahwa Gavana, murakoze kuri presentation muduhaye, ariko dufite ikibazo kirebana n'impungenge abaturage bashaka kugira ku birebana n'izamuka ry'ibiciro, kuko ibitungo bigaragaza ko biri hafi kugera ku 8%, bigorana nuko mu bishize guverinoma yatangaje izamuka ry'ibikomoka kuri peteroli, ndetse kandi hari n'amakuru aturuka mu gihugu cy'abaturanyi cya Tanzania, aho imvuru za politike zakurikiye amatora yahabaye bivugwa ko hari imizigo ya cargo yanyujije ku cyambu cya Mombasa. Hakaba hari abagaragaza impungenge yuko ibyo bishobora kuba byatuma izamuka ry'ibiciro rikomeza kuba ryanarenga n'8%. Ubwo muratubwira icyo mubitekerezaho ndetse n'icyo muri gukora kugira ngo bidakomeza kuba byabangamira abaturage. Ikindi kibazo ni kirebana, hari raporo yashyizwe hanze n'ikigo cyitwa TransUnion kigaragaza ko hari ibitero by'ikoranabuhanga bikomeje kuza ku bigo by'imari hano mu Rwanda, aho bigaragara ko u Rwanda ruri mu bihugu bya Afurika 5 bya mbere biri kugabwa ibitero. Turifuza kumenya icyo banki nkuru y'igihugu iri gukora kugira ngo habe gukumira ibyo bitero bitaba byateza igihombo ubukungu bw'igihugu. Hanyuma turifuza no kumenya naho umushinga w'ifaranga koranabuhanga rya CBDC ugeze, kuko ubushize mwe mwatubwiye ko nibura mu kwezi kwa 10 muzatutangariza ibyavuye mu cyo mwise proof of concept cyangwa se igerageza ryanyu. Turifuza kumenya aho bigeze. Ubwo ibyo birajyana n'ibijyanye n'umushinga w'itegeko wa virtual asset, nawo twumvise ko mwigeze kutangiza ariko ntabwo twamenye aho warangiriye, ariko mu byashize twabonye kuri Twitter yanyu X mugaragaza ko mwagiye muri Singapore muri fintech mugahura n'abitwa ba Coinbase. Ubwo muratubwira niba bifitanye isano n'ibyo no mushinga wa virtual asset. Murakoze.
Twaba dushubije ibibazo bya RBA duhereye ku cyambere ku muvuduko w'ibiciro. Icyo twagaragaje ni umuvuduko w'ibiciro mu mezi y'igihembwe cya gatatu cy'umwaka w'ibihumbi 2025, aho umuvuduko w'ibiciro wageze kuri 7.1% ugereranyije n'igihembwe cya kabiri, aho uwo muvuduko wari kuri 6.7%. Ikigaragara ni uko mu mibare ntabwo tubona aho umuvuduko w'ibiciro ushobora kurenga 8%. Nicyo twerekanye ko muri uyu mwaka w'ibihumbi 2025 uwo muvuduko w'ibiciro uzaba kuri 6.9%. Kandi muri iyo mibare dukoresha twanarebye uko ibyo biciro bishobora kuzamuka iyo tension cyangwa se imvururu twari twabonye nyuma y'amatora muri Tanzania zari gukomeza, ariko uko mubizi zarahagaze ndetse n'amakamyo yatangiye gukomeza kuza, ku buryo disruption yari yabaye muri icyo cyumweru itagize ingaruka cyane ku biciro ku masoko, yaba ku bicuruzwa tuvana mu mahanga bica Dar es Salaam cyangwa se n'ibindi bicuruzwa biza bijya mu nganda bitinze byari gutera ingaruka ku rwego rw'inganda. Aho rero turagira ngo tubahumurize kuko mubona ko no mu bihumbi 2026 imibare twereka ko umuvuduko w'ibiciro uzaba uri kuri 5.8%, biri hasi y'umuvuduko w'ibiciro by'uyu mwaka. Ikindi ni uko umusaruro mu buhinzi tubona ko uteganyijwe kuba mwiza muri iyi season A. Twatangiye kubona ko ibiciro ku masoko by'ibiribwa cyane cyane nk'ibirayi cyangwa se ibishyimbo bigenda bigabanuka, kandi muri aya mezi aje byanagaragaye mu mibare yo mu gihembwe cya gatatu ku mpuzandengo y'uko ibiciro by'ibiribwa bihagaze byaragabanutse. Ariko nanone mu mibare twerekanye ko ibiciro by'ibikomoka kuri peteroli byiyongereye. Hari ibiciro bishyirwaho na guverinoma kuri essence na mazutu byariyongereye, no mu mibare yacu dushyiramo scenarios yerekana si ibyo biciro bikomeje kwiyongera kubera ibiciro by'ubwikorezi, niba abantu bagomba guhindura aho bajyaga bacisha ibyo bicuruzwa bikava Dar es Salaam bikajya Mombasa. Uwo ni umuhanda uri muremure kurusha Dar es Salaam, ubwo ibiciro bya transport biriyongera, ari naho guverinoma yahereye izamura ibiciro by'ibikomoka kuri peteroli kubera icyo giciro cyane cyane cya transport. Twagaragaje ariko ko ku ku isoko mpuzamahanga ibiciro bya peteroli byo bizakomeza kugabanuka. Aho rero turabona ko pressure ku muvuduko w'ibiciro utazazamuka cyane, ariyo mpamvu muri iyi mibare mubona yuko umuvuduko w'ibiciro uri hafi ahubwo kwegera 5% kurusha uko byarenga 8%. Aho ni icyo gisobanuro twatanga. Ku byerekeranye n'iyo raporo mwavuze ya TransUnion, kuba dukoresha cyane ikoranabuhanga ntago bitangaje ko n'abashaka kutwinjirira muri systeme z'ikoranabuhanga bareba igihugu cyane cyane kirimo gutera imbere mu ikoranabuhanga. Kuba haba cyber attacks cyangwa se ibyo bitero n'igeragezwa ry'ibitero, aho twagira impungenge nuko haba a successful attempt cyangwa umuntu wagerageza kwinjira muri system akabishobora. Naho ibitero byo buri munsi turabibona. Icyiza nuko hari ingamba zikomeye ku rwego rw'igihugu byo kwirinda bicishijwe muri National Cyber Security Authority dukorana umunsi ku wundi, ndetse natwe nk'urwego rureberera urwego rw'imari hari icyo twita Financial Sector Operation Center itwereka ishusho mu bigo byose uko ibyo bitero byaba bije, tukaba tuzi uko twabikumira kandi tunatanga amakuru ku nzego zose z'imari. Icyanyuma nuko dukomeje kugira amahugurwa no guhugura ibigo byose by'imari, ndetse muri iki gice cya kabiri cy'umwaka twanagiye dukora inspections mu bigo byose by'imari duhereye ku mabanki yose kugira ngo turebe uko bahagaze mu bwirinzi bw'ibyo bitero, turebe capacity bafite cyangwa ubushobozi n'ubuhanga bw'abakozi babo bari mu ikoranabuhanga mu kirango bumve uko bakumira ibyo bitero. Ni inspection cyangwa se amagenzura twakoranye na NCSA kugira ngo buri gihe tube tuzi ko uwagerageza ibyo bitero dufite uko tumukumira kandi dufite ko twanabisubiza inyuma. Ariko ni urugendo ruhoraho, ndetse iyo umuntu arebye na raporo ku rwego rw'isi niyo risk ya mbere ihangayikishije regulators cyangwa na banki nkuru, kubera ko tugenda tujya mu gihe urwego rw'imari rukoresha cyane ikoranabuhanga. Ntabwo ari ibintu bizahagarara kuko harimo inyungu nyinshi, ariko ubwo n'izo risk cyangwa n'ibyo byago byo kuba haba ihungabana ry'urwego rw'imari ruturutse ku gukoresha kw'ikoranabuhanga ni ibintu tuganira natwe na bagenzi bacu kugira ngo tubikumire. Aho rero nta mpungenge twagira. Icyanyuma CBDC nibyo proof of concept cyangwa igerageza twararishoje, ubu tugeze ku musozo wo kuba twatanga raporo, ariko hari ibikinozwa n'abandi bafatanyabikorwa yaba Minisiteri y'Ikoranabuhanga na Innovation, yaba ndetse n'urwego rw'abikorera na Fintech Association. Mwabonye ko muri uku kwezi hari amakampani mato ya fintech cyangwa akoresha ikoranabuhanga nayo yari muri iryo gerageza yerekana product ashobora gukoresha iryo faranga koranabuhanga ry'u Rwanda risohotse, ku buryo ari ikintu kiduha icyizere ko hari n'izindi serivisi z'imari zatangwa zishingiye kuri iryo faranga koranabuhanga. Aho rero turabizeza ko izo consultation no kusanya ibitekerezo ku bafatanyabikorwa rirangiye, namwe nk'abanyamakuru tuzabahamagara tukabatangariza ibyavuye muri iryo gerageza, ndetse tunabaha n'ishusho y'uko pilot phase cyangwa kugerageza ku baturage benshi, noneho bigerageza ryari ku bakozi bake ba BNL nabo mu rwego rw'imari uko rizagenda. Ikindi tugenda tunakomeza kureba ku rwego rw'isi uko ibindi bihugu nabyo aho bigeze mu kugerageza iryo faranga koranabuhanga, cyane cyane ibihugu duhahirana, byaba mu bihugu byo muri Middle East cyangwa se n'ibihugu by'i Burayi. Hari aho byatangaje ko ubu bigeze noneho kugerageza mu baturage, ndetse banatanga ko mu myaka 3 iri imbere nko muri Eurozone byo ni ibintu byatangajwe ko digital euro ishobora gusohoka mu bihumbi 2029. Ibihugu byo muri Eurozone ni ibihugu duhahirana cyane, aho rero biraduha ishusho y'uko natwe tugomba kwitegura, cyane cyane ko benefit imwe twari twabonye muri CBDC ni uko kwishyurana cross border cyangwa mu bihugu bitandukanye ikiguzi cyo kwishyurana umuntu akoresheje ifaranga koranabuhanga gishobora kujya hasi. Aho rero iyi myiteguro turimo igendanye n'indi myiteguro n'igeragezwa mu bindi bihugu duhahirana birimo kudufasha, kuko nabyo tugenda tuganira nabyo kugira ngo turebe n'uyo gerageza tuzakora muri pilot bashobora kudufasha tugakorana nabo kugira ngo tugerageze niba n'iyo cross border payments, kuvuga kwishyurana turi hano n'ibindi bihugu by'i Burayi birimo kugerageza iyo digital euro, ibihugu byo muri United Arab Emirates cyangwa ni Leta Zunze Ubumwe z'Abarabu nabo batangije pilot, kandi ibihugu duhahirana cyane. Igihugu cy'Ubushinwa nacyo kiri muri pilot ya EU1 cyangwa ifaranga koranabuhanga ryabo. Aho rero ni biduha ishusho y'icyo natwe tugomba gukora kugira ngo umunsi ibyo bihugu byatangije iryo faranga koranabuhanga natwe tube twiteguye duhe n'ayo mahirwe abikorera ndetse n'abantu n'abanyarwanda muri rusange. Ndumva icyanyuma mwavugaga itegeko rireba virtual assets. Ni itegeko ryateguwe na Capital Markets Authority na BNR, aho rigeze ririmo gusuzumwa na Minisiteri y'Imari n'Igenamigambi, ari izarigeza muri cabinet kugira ngo ribanze ryigweho hanyuma ribone kujya mu nteko ishinga amategeko. Ubwo aho twebwe akazi kacu gasa na karangiye, ariko tugomba no gusubiza ibibazo byibazwa cyane cyane n'izindi minisiteri kugira ngo rishobore kuba ryatangwa rikagezwa ku nteko ishinga amategeko ari izaryemeza. Ibyo ntabwo bitubuza gukomeza kwiga no kureba aho virtual assets zigeze ku rwego rw'isi. Nk'uko mwabivuze koko u Rwanda rwari rwatumiwe muri Singapore FinTech Festival, ariyo nama nini ku isi ireba ikoranabuhanga mu mari no kureba icyo ejo hazaza hategerejwe. Icyiza ni uko binadufasha guhura n'izindi banki nkuru ku rwego rw'isi, nazo hari zimwe ibihugu bimwe byemeje ayo mategeko agenga virtual assets, cyane cyane igihugu cy'Amerika na Genius Act mwarayumvise yemeye ko cryptocurrency ishobora gukoreshwa muri icyo gihugu ndetse ikanatanga imirongo migari. Ibihugu by'umuryango w'abibumbye w'i Burayi nayo European Union yashyizeho iyindi regulatory framework yitwa MiCA. Singapore nayo niko yabigenje. Byerekana ishusho ko virtual assets zigenda ari navuga amafaranga cyangwa se ahantu umuntu ashobora gushora imari, ariko hagiyeho amategeko n'umurongo werekana uko bikorwa, igisabwa, ndetse zinareba risk n'ibyago umuntu yagira byo guhomba kugira ngo abaturage batabijyamo hatari ayo mategeko abarengera. Niyo nzira rero turimo, ni nayo mpamvu tugenda tunahura n'abashoramari bifuza kuza kuba batanga izo serivisi mu Rwanda ariko no muri Afurika bakoresheje Kigali International Financial Center. Numva ari ibyo navuga kuri ibibazo mwambajije.
Abi, 2 questions please. Okay.
Thank you so much and good morning, Governor. My name is Abi Agina from CNBC Africa with our audiences in West, East and South Africa. Just 2 quick questions. My first question is in regards to fuel prices. And you did talk about inflation numbers sort of easing, and with this new development around increased transportation costs, how is this likely to impact on your outlook for the remaining months into the year? And is this going to be a major shock or it's a mild shock for now? Then my second question is in regards to the currency. You did indicate that we've seen on the global front the US dollar has of course been tumbling, and looking at other currencies across Africa and in East Africa, we've also seen a sort of mixed bag when it comes to how currencies have performed, including Rwanda's franc. Is your office concerned about how the franc has been performing? Is it finding its equilibrium? Are you monitoring this and any interventions you hope to take? And lastly is on your outlook for 2026. I know your next meeting is in February, and this meeting sort of sets the tone for the upcoming year. If you could also talk to our viewers on that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll start with the question on currency and for impact of fuel prices on our inflation, be it for the remaining months in 2025 and 2026, that I would ask our Director of Monetary Policy, Professor Kasai, to respond, as well as the basis of our forecast for 2026. And so for the currency, I would start by saying that as a central bank, as you've seen, we are less concerned about the volatility of our currency if we look back at how the currency evolved from 2020. We showed the chart with the highest depreciation rate in 2023, and it's actually the year we also had the highest inflation on the back of the Ukraine war in 2022, but also rising Fed interest rates, which made the dollar stronger. Obviously, we know that our structural trade deficit always has an impact on the rand and franc exchange rate versus the dollar, but also other major currencies. This year, what the central bank had done and had started doing even 3 years ago was to ensure that the volatility we see on our currency are not driven by speculation. Hence, with the reforms we've made with enhanced inspections for all foreign exchange market players, but also ensuring that the use of the rand and franc in Rwanda is complied with, and hence our regulation and FX directive on who is allowed to be able to price or ask payments in other currencies than the rand and franc, revised this year in May with a directive showing exactly which sectors may continue to price in other currencies because of the nature of their activities, released in September. And so with the US dollar softening on global markets because also of an easing monetary policy stance by the US Fed, these foreign exchange market reforms to limit any speculative tendencies, we are confident that now we will have a more stable currency, which we're experiencing since January. You may recall that in the past, our optimal depreciation rate, although as individual corporates, we don't like depreciation, but for a developing country with a large trade deficit and a large current account deficit, which we know is a result of our investments for economic growth, would be around 5%. Hence, now that we have 4% until end of September, it's in the range of what we would expect normally the currency to depreciate in, based on the economic fundamentals and trade dynamics that we have. So I'll give the floor now to Professor Kasai for the other two questions.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Abi, for the question. Maybe I would start with saying that the projections for 2025, especially on inflation, have been revised down. That's the first main message, because in August, the inflation was projected to be at around 7.1 for the entire year. But now the recent projections, the one that the Monetary Policy Committee has used to take the decision, are indicating that this would not be above 6.9%. Then the question would be, what are the main reasons to revise down the inflation? The first thing is the outcome of the last few quarters, where the Monetary Policy Committee observed that there is a good performance of the agriculture sector, but also, as the governor has highlighted, the global supply is also ample, which is also contributing to this trend of 2025. The Monetary Policy Committee, as the governor has highlighted, is not based on what we have recorded as of recent, but as what it sees going to happen in the future. Those are the projections. The projections are also, and this is the second question, the projections, though revised up slightly, that is for inflation, from 5.6 to 5.8, it is still very close to 5% and actually well below the ceiling of 8%, I mean for inflation. But even for other numbers like the output, the GDP, the projections are indicating that the production will remain to be high, especially supported by the service sector, the industry, and the agriculture sector, which is also continuing to perform well. But as highlighted by the governor again, the risks are always there, but we do not preempt that they are going to be materialized. The risks that have been mentioned by the governor include the weather patterns that could affect the projections, but for the moment we don't see any challenge, and of course the global trade policies that could change anytime. Those are things that the Monetary Policy Committee will continue to monitor, so that whenever there is a change, the Monetary Policy Committee will adjust accordingly. But for the moment, the projections are on the good note. Thank you, Governor.
Further questions? We still have 15 minutes.
Yeah, we can take Vincent and person behind.
Rakoza Governor, Vincent Gasana, KT Press. You mentioned the issue with receipt of premiums in the insurance sector. Where are the bottlenecks? Is that within the actual insurance companies themselves, or with the people who are looking for insurance? And if it is the latter, what can really be done about it to persuade people to be a little bit more on time with their premiums? The other thing, if I may, given the nature of our economy as a developing economy, the projections, the figures, there is a longer lag than one would expect in more advanced economies. Do we have a projected period of time, say 3 months or any number of months, when people can begin to see that the inflation figures are reflected within the market? There is a strange correlation that usually people are very quick to pick up on things going up, but they're very slow to pick up on things coming down. So it's how does one say to people, well, look, the actual figures indicate that the economy is performing this way and inflation will come down? How long can we, given the nature of our economy, can we give that? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vincent. Maybe we'll take another question and respond.
Poser ma question en français. Merci. La gouverneure, vous avez oui, je suis Anastase Gomeza, je viens du journal La Une. C'était un journal francophone. Dans votre présentation, vous avez projeté la baisse des prix d'énergie en 2026, si j'ai bien compris. Mais au courant de cette année, le gouvernement a rehaussé les prix d'énergie, notamment l'électricité. Est-ce que ce n'est pas un paradoxe vous pouvez expliquer ça. Ma deuxième question, c'est la stratégie de la Banque nationale par rapport à l'utilisation systématique des codes marchands Momo. Beaucoup de commerçants demandent aux clients ou aux demandeurs de services de payer sur leur propre numéro personnel pendant qu'ils devaient payer sur Momo. Quelle stratégie la banque prend pour pallier à ce problème? La dernière question, c'est la question de curiosité. En abrégé, le franc rwandais, c'est FRW ou c'est RW, c'est Rwandan franc ou franc rwandais, ou les deux. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. I will start probably with the question on by Vincent at QT Press on the reason behind these increasing receivables in insurance. So what we are observing is that insurance companies, when underwriting insurance policies, in our regulation, they are allowed to give leeway to their customers, especially corporate clients, because of cash flow management and treasury management, up to 60 days to pay those premiums. So where we see a risk is when they start accumulating receivables, meaning overdue payments of premiums above those 60 days, which we have shown as, now having reached 65% of all receivables. The main reason is that, one, there's almost no penalty for a company not to pay their premium. It's not the same as when you don't have a loan, that you know you will end up being blacklisted in the Credit Reference Bureau. And so, unfortunately, the culture, but it's not only Rwanda, in most developing economies, is that insurance is the last payment I would make when I've met my other obligations, which is not right, because it poses a risk of liquidity for the insurance company, but also on the long run may hamper their ability to even settle claims, because for an insurance companies, the premiums they receive, they invest them to have a return and be able to pay back claims in case of an accident or a medical claim and so forth. And so our efforts have been, one, to educate the population on, one, the benefits of insurance, but also why it's important to pay your premiums on time. Otherwise, you have the risk that if suddenly you have an unfortunate event, you will not receive claims. Second is also the recovery practices for our insurance companies. Some of them, because of large corporate clients they have, which they are competing for, may not be as forceful in enforcing those premium payments, because they say the client will go to another insurance company and be offered the same service, and by the time central bank comes and start penalize that other insurance companies, we've already lost clients. So we've been, in the last months, engaging intensively the industry, the association ASAR, to explain to them why our regulation has to be complied with, and at certain points we've had to issue penalties because selling insurance on credit beyond the 60 days we allow in certain cases is not allowed. So they haven't been complying with our regulation. For households and individuals, it's the same approach. As an individual, I always tend to pay my bills, cash power, and I don't have electricity, then I don't have electricity. So I'm not going to pay insurance if I'm, has some cash flow issues. But it's also take time to educate people why paying for your premiums is important. Otherwise, you're not covered as a person, or you're not covering your assets. So there's, to sum up, financial literacy efforts that need to continue, more enforcement by insurance companies, and being able to recover receivables that are going above 60%, but also corporates and institution understanding that if the overdue are above those 60 days that we can allow in certain cases, actually your claims will not be settled. So that a multifaceted efforts, and we are confident that we will start to see improvements in that area going forward. On inflation expectation and how they translate in the population. One of the fundamental reasons why it's important for a central bank to communicate forward-looking policy stance and looking at projections it has is to anchor expectation on where inflation is going to stand for a period of time. And we do this, based on our analysis, but also going through different scenarios of the shocks that might impact inflation and our projections. In addition to those forecasts done by our monetary policy and research team, we conduct monthly surveys on inflation expectation by households. And that indicates whether our forecasts versus expectations of inflation by households and businesses are aligned. If they were not aligned, then it means there would be some factors that either are pushing people to expect prices to go higher than what we have in our projections, and it's those two avenues that allow us to anchor expectations at the level that we scientifically have looked at. But it also means that the coordination with other stakeholders, for instance, for volatile prices, fresh food as well as energy, we are part of working groups on agriculture sector to look at how the production expected is going on agriculture season, with Meteo Rwanda to look at weather patterns and expectations to inform those forecasts and making sure that we are anchoring expectation to what on the ground really is happening. So that's what I could say. And maybe another thing is how we've been looking at our transmission mechanism of when we set a central bank rate, how does it transmit to different rates? And we can see improvements that now money markets react immediately, interbank rate, treasury bills and treasury bonds rates as well. Deposit rate and lending rate have a lag of between 12 and 18 months, but it's something that's expected for a developing economy like ours where capital markets are not yet deep, but it's something that we continue to monitor, and we have also a monetary policy implementation committee that meets every week to make sure that the rates are following our CBR, that liquidity levels in the market are adequate, and we intervene to make sure that we don't see any discrepancy in how our monetary policy stance and position is and the implementation by market players. Pour les deux questions en français, peut-être la première question sur la baisse des prix d'énergie au niveau mondial, alors qu'on voit que sur notre marché, les prix d'électricité et les prix de produits pétroliers a augmenté. Je demanderai à notre directeur de politique monétaire d'y répondre. Pour l'utilisation de codes marchands, merchant code, Momo code, c'est vrai que nous avons encore des personnes dans le secteur privé qui ne veulent pas utiliser le Momo code, qui ne permettent pas à leurs clients de pouvoir payer électroniquement. Il y a deux raisons fondamentales. La première qui était liée au coût de ces services. Je pense que maintenant on a compris que 0,25 pour tous les montants au-delà de 4 000 francs rwandais, ce n'est pas un coût énorme par rapport aux bénéfices qu'une personne, homme et femme d'affaires ou les personnes qui sont dans le secteur des services puissent considérer comme un coût exorbitant. En revanche, ce sont des analyses que nous avons faites avec l'administration fiscale ou de collecte des revenus, Rwanda Revenue Authority. Il y a des personnes qui ne veulent pas être transparents par rapport aux transactions qu'ils effectuent et donc ils demandent encore d'être payés en liquide. Et c'est l'une des mesures, c'est être sûr que toutes les transactions faites dans le secteur privé puissent être enregistrées. Et l'un des moyens de les enregistrer et de les contrôler, c'est par rapport au paiement électronique. Nous avons conduit plusieurs campagnes cashless pour être sûr que le secteur privé adopte ces méthodes de paiement. Et quand on regarde les dernières 5 ans, en fait, il n'y avait que moins de 50 000 personnes dans le secteur privé qui utilisaient, que ce soit Momo Code ou Airtel Money Code. Aujourd'hui, on a près de 400 000. Maintenant, ça ne veut pas dire qu'ils activent ces modes de paiement. Et c'est pour ça que nos équipes sont là aussi. Si une personne, on lui demande de payer sur un numéro personnel, ils peuvent toujours nous contacter pour que notre département chargé de Financial Conduct, le mot en français m'échappe, puisse intervenir et être sûr que tout client puisse être en mesure de payer via transaction électronique. Je donne la parole à professeur Kassai pour la question sur la baisse des prix énergétiques.
Merci, Madame la Gouverneure. Merci pour la question à propos du prix de l'énergie en rapport avec le prix de l'électricité ici au Rwanda. Peut-être pour commencer, je pourrais expliquer que le prix d'énergie au niveau global n'est pas nécessairement lié au prix de l'électricité ici au Rwanda, bien qu'il y a des corrélations où l'un peut être le substitut de l'autre, spécialement, j'allais le dire en anglais, surtout sur les gaz naturels, là ça peut se substituer à l'électricité, mais sur l'énergie en général, là où nous avons par exemple le pétrole, ça ne se substitue pas nécessairement avec l'énergie et avec l'électricité ici au Rwanda. Si vous regardez au niveau global, peut-être je commence par là, au niveau global, nous avons, le gouverneur a expliqué que lorsque nous regardons dans la vie globale, nous voyons que le prix de l'énergie au niveau global a diminué pour l'année 2024. Même les projections pour l'année 2025 indiquent que ça va continuer, bien que l'année va se terminer bientôt, mais la moyenne annuelle montre qu'il y aura toujours une réduction, même l'année prochaine. Mais en regardant le gaz naturel, si on prend seulement les gaz naturels, là, ça n'a pas diminué, bien que ça n'a pas de relation avec l'électricité ici au Rwanda que je vais expliquer. La raison pour laquelle l'électricité au Rwanda a augmenté, c'est puisqu'il y a eu d'ajustement après une longue période, là où le pays n'avait pas fait d'ajustement à propos du prix de l'électricité qui doivent être liés aux dépenses et aux coûts liés à la production même de l'électricité. C'est ce qui a fait qu'il y ait cette augmentation ici au Rwanda. Merci, Madame le Gouverneur.
Je crois qu'il y avait une dernière question de curiosité, le franc rwandais. Je ne vais peut-être pas entrer dans les raisons coloniales pourquoi c'est le franc rwandais FRW, mais la nomenclature internationale reste FRW, même si en anglais c'est Rwandan franc, Mukinyarwanda faranga y'u Rwanda, mais dans les transactions internationales c'est enregistré comme FRW. Merci. Yes, another 2 questions. I see 2 people. So.
Thank you, Madam Governor. Edwin Ashimwe, I work with the New Times. Governor, I want to take you back in May when you announced plans or indicated plans of diversifying your reserve mix, especially by adding gold holdings. Have we seen any milestones so far? Have we seen any purchases executed? Have we seen thresholds? Do you want to also speak to the volatility among global bullion markets, especially on the value position of it? And if you could also circle back to the CBDC, which you talked about earlier, you could also talk to any milestones that we have seen, especially in the design and also interoperability between the existing payment systems. I thank you.
So I will respond to the question on reserves diversification, and on CBDC, probably Deputy Governor, who's chairing our CBDC task force, can give the latest update. So it is true, we had announced that as a Central Bank of Rwanda, we are considering investing in gold as an asset that, one, we had researched and we could see that it met our criteria in terms of capital preservation, steady return and liquidity. We started investing in gold. Of course, we don't give our portfolio mix publicly, but we have a strategic asset allocation that allows us to invest in gold in line with proportions other central banks invest in, and for emerging economies, it can go up to 10% of your total reserves. Secondly, on the price evolution, you have seen that gold has broken records this year. As a central bank, we are not traders but long-term investors, but the returns we've seen for this year on gold, since January, gold has gained up to 57% of its value, although it's volatile. So the recent weeks we've seen a drop in prices, but they are still higher than at the beginning of the year. And so we have a risk management mechanism to mitigate that volatility, but overall the return is above the return we were expecting, looking at historical returns, where gold in the last 20 years was, the price was growing by 11% on average annually, which is this year above that, but we are cognizant that it can also go down because of different factors. And so far, I would say that we are comfortable with our investments, and it's an asset that we will continue to have among our assets in the investment portfolio.
Thank you, Governor. I can only compliment to what you had mentioned earlier. We started with a proof of concept on the CBDC. Very good milestones in terms of it being a tool for transaction, and also whether there is interoperability with other systems that we have. We have very good learnings. We are now at a stage where we are developing a final report on it. That is, we're engaging with different stakeholders before we come out with a report on the proof of concept, and then what next steps that we can take. But also, as the governor mentioned, it's also to see what other countries or trading partners are doing, and that will inform what next steps we want to take. So right now I would say to you, let's finalize the report that we're working on after consultations with key partners, and then we'll be publishing a detailed report on the proof of concept and what next steps that we want to take. Thank you. Sorry? I think we indicated that before the end of the year, the report on the proof of concept will be ready. As to what next steps are going to be, that will be informed by the consultations that we are currently doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. I'm by the name of Moses Ikwishime from Royal FM. Allow me to ask my question in Kinyarwanda. So, niba narebye neza ibyoherezwa hanze byazamutseho 15%, hanyuma ibyinjira bizamukaho 7.4%. So ikibazo cyane ni iki? Ni gute banki nkuru BNR ikorana n'inzego cyangwa se izakorana n'inzego z'ubucuruzi wenda n'iza minisiteri bireba kugira ngo hashyirweho politiki zorohereza abohereza hanze umusaruro no kwagura amasoko yo hanze? Murakoze.
Murakoze. Wenda icyo kibazo nasaba nanone Deputy Governor akaba yagisubiza. hari byinshi bikorwa na guverinoma kandi natwe tuba turi mu tunama twiga kuko twakongera ibyoherezwa hanze tunagabanya ibyo dukura hanze, ariko hari ibyo tuzi ko tudashobora kwikorera iwacu bizakomeza kuva hanze, ariko Deputy Governor nawe yamuha ibisobanuro.
Urakoze Gavana. Ikibazo cyenda gisubiza mu buryo bubiri. Hari ukwibaza ngo mu byo dukura hanze ni ibiki tubona twakorera mu Rwanda, hariho Made in Rwanda campaign, kandi hari politiki zitandukanye, hariyo gushyigikira inganda, hari no kureba, mwabonye yuko muri loans inganda ziri muri sectors ziri mu kugurizwa cyane, bijyanye na politiki yo kumwoka duteza inganda zo mu Rwanda imbere zishobore kuba za substitutinga bimwe mu byo dukura hanze. Ingero zimwe ni nko muri edible cooking oil, hari ibyo twimportinga ari raw materials tukabirefininga tugahaza isoko ryacu, ahubwo tukana-re-exportinga. Izo ni ingamba zimwe zo kuvuga ngo ibyo dukura hanze ni ibihe twa substitutinga dukoresheje inganda zacu, ariko noneho n'ibyo twohereza hanze. Njya muri raporo icyo mwabonye, kubera yuko n'ibiciro ku isoko mpuzamahanga ku bimwe twohereza hanze ibiciro ari byiza, turi mu gushyira dukorana n'abandi nzego za leta kora yuko twakongeza volume yabyo kugira ngo tumaximize kuri ibyo ngibyo, harimo ikawa, amajyani na minerals. Nyamaze iminsi mukurikira mureba ingamba leta iri mu gufata kugira na mineral sector itera imbere. Unarebye nanone muri raporo twatanze nayo iri muri sectors banks ziri mu gufinansinga kugira ngo growing. So muri make n'uwo turi mu gufatanya n'izindi nzego za leta kureba ibyo twakora nka import substitution, ariko tunareba n'ibyo twohereza hanze, ibyo umubare wabyo volume yayo ukuntu yakwa increasing. Nizo ngamba turi mu banka y'u Rwanda ifatanyije n'izindi nzego. Murakoze.
Murakoze Gavana, nitwa Cyubahiro Gasarade, nkorera Flash. Mfite ibibazo bitandukanye ntabwo mbatinza. Mwagaragaje ko inflation itazarenga navuga ubushobozi bwo kwikorora, ariko tubona ibiciro bya peteroli bizamuka, bimaze kuzamuka inshuro ebyiri. Ntibishobora kuba byagira ingaruka. Ikibazo cya kabiri nacyo cya nyuma, twabonye ko niba nabyita umutungo assets za bank zarazamutse ku kigero cya 24%, nibyo, ariko se umuntu ashobora kwibaza ko nubwo wenda byazamutse ariko hari abaturage cyangwa se abacuruzi bagiye babona wenda nk'izo nguzanyo mu mabanki bakananirwa kuzishyura, ubwo banki zikarohera zunguka cyane. So uburyo bwo guherekeza abantu bafata inguzanyo bakabasha kubona, navuga ngo bakabyaza umusaruro inguzanyo baba bahawe, njyewe ntabwo mbisobanukiwe neza, mwaza kumfasha gusobanukirwa kurushaho. Murakoze.
Murakoze. Ndumva icyerekeranye n'umuvuduko w'ibiciro nuko tubihuza ibiciro byazamutse koko ku bikomoka kuri peteroli n'umuvuduko w'ibiciro muri rusange. Ubwo Professor Kasayi nk'umuyobozi w'ishami rya politiki y'ifaranga kongera akabisobanura no kubamara impungenge ko umuvuduko w'ibiciro uko tubona yaba uyu mwaka ntabwo uzarenga 6.9%, umwaka utaha imibare yatwereka ko ari 5.8%. Hanyuma ku cya kabiri uko duhuza umutungo w'ibigo by'imari yaba banki yaba ibigo by'imari biciriritse microfinance ndetse n'ibigo by'ubwishingizi byiyongeyeho 24% uko inguzanyo zishyurwa. Ubwo Bernard ushinzwe financial stability nawe yaza kubisubiza. Kasai.
Murakoze Governor, ndumva ikibazo cye gihuye n'icya Abi. Ubundi iri teganyamibare rikorwa na Banki Nkuru y'u Rwanda, ibyo byose biba byateganijwe. Ntabwo iri teganyamibare tubona ryerekana ko umuvuduko w'izamuka ry'ibiciro uzaba uri kuri 6.9 wirengagije ibyo byose muri kuvuga. Ibyo byo kubona ko hashobora kubizamuka nangwa kuba ibiciro bya peteroli byarazamutse hano mu Rwanda, ubwo nabyo byashyizwe muri iyo mibare. N'iteganyamibare rijyanye n'ibikomoka ku ngufu birimo peteroli nabyo bishyirwa muri iyo mibare, ariko nubwo byashyizwemo kandi wenda icyo twabizeza ni uko ikigaragara ntabwo bizakomeza kuzamuka cyane iyo tubirebye mu iteganyamibare. Nubwo iteganyamibare aba ari iteganyamibare, ariko ntabwo bizakomeza kuzamuka cyane. Gavana yavuze impamvu byazamutse ko ijyanye na cost ya transport. Iyo cost ya transport ntabwo duteganya ko izakomeza kwiyongera. Niyo ubwo hari aho bizagera, bishobora kuba vuba, bishobora kuba byaranarangiye, ariko ntabwo bizakomeza kwiyongera cyane ku buryo bishobora kugira pressure kuri inflation. Kandi icyo umuntu yavuga ni uko iryo teganyamibare n'ubundi ibyo byari birimo. Maybe if you don't understand Kinyarwanda, I should have mentioned this, that in our projections, the projections that are being done by the National Bank of Rwanda, they have already considered the dynamics around the prices of fuel, which means that the projections that we have of 6.9 for 2025 and 5.8 for 2026 have considered all those dynamics. Thank you.
Murakoze ku kibazo cyari kibajijwe impamvu umutungo w'ibigo by'imari wazamutse ukagera kuri 24.3%. Birumvikana yuko cyane cyane umutungo w'amabanki n'ibigo by'imari bitanga inguzanyo biragaragara yuko byazamutse ku kigero cyiza, ariko ibikigize ni igiki? Uwo mutungo ugizwe n'iki? Ugizwe n'amadepo ukagirwa n'inguzanyo. Bivuze yuko iyo umutungo w'amabanki uzamuka, bivuze ko n'inguzanyo ziba zitangwa. Kubihuza nuko wenda inguzanyo zaba zitishyurwa neza, ntabwo ari byo, ko murebye ikigero cy'inguzanyo zitishyurwa cyaragabanutse kuri 2.6 na 2.9. Bigaragara yuko n'inguzanyo zirimo gutangwa uyu munsi ziri kwishyurwa neza. Bivuze yuko ku rundi ruhande abaka inguzanyo ari abikorera bari gukora neza, bakunguka, bakishyura. Bivuze yuko rero yuko icyo tubona nuko iyo umutungo w'ibigo by'imari uzamuka, bigaragara yuko ku rundi ruhande biba biri gufasha n'abikorera cyane cyane mu kubona inguzanyo, ariko nanone cyane no ku rundi ruhande rw'ibigo by'imari bitanga ubwishingizi, premium ziba zizamuka nabyo bigira uruhare mu kuzamura umutungo w'urwego rw'imari, bikanagira n'ingaruka nziza ku mutungo mbumbe w'igihugu. N'ubu ari cyo nasubiza.
Thank you, Governor. I think this marks the end of the press conference. One last announcement is that the press releases are going to be posted on our website, plus the presentation that the Governor used is also going to be posted on the website. Thank you.
Thank you. But before we close, I would like to thank the internal teams that work on this analysis we use, both at Monetary Policy Committee and Financial Stability Committee. We have rigorous analysis that they work on for close to 7 weeks to be able to inform our decisions. So the Monetary Policy and Research Directorate, the Financial Stability Directorate, Market and Banking Operations, financial sector and market conduct. And so I want to thank them, and I know the media, so that you don't leave this room thinking it's only committee members that go through the numbers. There's a collective effort from these whole teams in the bank, and they've been doing this throughout the year, the 4 MPC and FSC we've held, and I wanted to put this on record that we thank them as committees as well, because we see refined analysis, and our projection actually are getting closer to the reality, and I'm confident that in the next FSC MPC we can be able to show you from the projections we had and what the reality has shown, how we've been monitoring that they are closer together. So thank you very much, and to our media partners again for your partnership. Umunsi mwiza, and have a good day to everyone. Thank you.